Good morning, everyone. Hello. We're going to try to get started, so if you can find a seat, please. Well, good morning and welcome to the 2025 Kentucky Historical Society Annual Meeting. And I call this meeting to order. Normally, we would have this meeting in the old state capitol, but we have a lot going on over there this weekend, so we will be having our festivities here. So, let's begin with recognition of our current and outgoing board members. And I believe Scott Alvey, our executive director, is going to handle those honors.
Great, thank you, Cynthia. Before we go on, if you are a current board member as of right now, could you maybe please raise your hand and be recognized? Thank you. And do we have any foundation board members here with us today? I know we had a couple signed up. Suzanne and, yeah, great. Roberts. Thank you all for being here today. This is always kind of a bittersweet moment, but all the people that I'm about to talk about or talk to, I've already given them the heads up. You're not done with us yet. This is just this part of your service for the Kentucky Historical Society that we're recognizing. I've got a couple folks. Unfortunately, Dr. Deanna Stivers-Allen couldn't be with us today, but we appreciate her 4 years of service here on the governing board. I'd also like to call up Brent Bjorkman. Brent, come on up. Next, I'd like to call up Mel Hankla. And normally we would have the president doing this, but we're also thanking Miss Cynthia Torp. Cynthia's had 10 years of service, starting from 2016 to 2025 as an outgoing president. We also present her with this wonderful plaque recognizing her terms as both vice president, as a governing board member, and as governing board president. So again, thank you.
but I'm not done yet. Next on our agenda is the approval of the 2024 KHS Annual Meeting minutes. And I call for a motion to approve those minutes. Can anyone in attendance? All right, I have a motion on the floor to approve the minutes. And please state your name. Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay. Thank you, Alistine. Are there any corrections to the minutes? All right, hearing none, I call for a vote to approve the minutes. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand and saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. Next on the agenda are the reports. And first up, although he went and sat back down at the table, is the Kentucky Historical Society Executive Director, Scott Alvey.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you. All right, just kind of move some things. For those of you I haven't met before, I think I've met everybody here in the room. I'm Scott Alvey. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Historical Society, and it's been a really busy year. Been looking through, if you were at the Heritage and Harvest event that we had just a couple weeks ago, I spent a lot of time kind of digging back in through some of the early Kentucky Historical Society history. We also had a chance, we've been working on and working towards development of a strategic plan over the past year. And that also kind of took us back into a kind of a look back about why are we here? And I thought that would be a good place for us to start today. For those of you who were here a couple weeks ago, it'll be a little bit of a retread of a similar theme. But I thought, when we're trying to answer that question about why KHS, why are we here, there would be no better thing to do than to turn back to our history to find out how we got here. So I want to talk about a couple things, and as I go through them, through this history of it, I think you're going to find that there are several themes that tend to resonate, both from when they first developed the Kentucky Historical Society in 1836. So as I had mentioned the other day, it starts actually in 1834 when there's an article about recounting the rescue of Daniel Boone's daughter and the two Callaway sisters from Native Americans who had attacked in July 1776. And so Colonel John Floyd is recounting this story in the newspaper, and it captures the attention of not just people here in Frankfort, but all over the country. You see this article appearing all over the place. And so you see this using a story of history that helps spark not just the imagination, but our concern and our care for how do we know what's going to go forward, how are we going to understand our past. And so this group of people come together in 1836 and say, we need a historical society. We need to go out and we need to collect all these items. We need to grab all these stories. And they have this sense of urgency. So the Kentucky Historical Society is actually the 11th historical society to be organized on American soil on April 22nd of 1836. It actually meets in the Secretary of State's office down there on the public square in Frankfort, where the old state capitol currently is. They immediately began organizing an annual meeting where they can share the work of the society. So it's been a lot of fun to go through those elements as well, reading some of these past stories about what happened at the annual meetings. As part of it, they're inviting pioneers to attend the meeting for, quote, the purpose of communicating the incidents connected with the early settlement as they may have been received from their ancestors. So we're already talking about early oral histories, right, that we're looking to collect. They began publishing this information and sharing all the information they have about Kentucky history. Just prior to the Civil War, that period of civil unrest, they decided to suspend the Historical Society. It actually becomes part of the library that they had collected, becomes the beginning for the Louisville Free Public Library. And George Rannick, he assembles a group of history enthusiasts to kind of re-energize the Historical Society in, ironically, Halloween of 1878. And he has this great quote. It said, "Our aim is to avoid the dangers which always threaten such associations where mere zeal, however credible, has proven inadequate to their perpetuation." So I took that to mean, here comes the administrative work. I think there's some really funny aspects of it and ironic things. In the annual meeting at 1880, none other than Cassius Clay makes a plea to the state legislature for a state appropriation to, quote, "pay officers to print records and transactions for the exchange with other societies and the public use, and thus do our part for the advancement of the state, the nation, and mankind." Then there's some funny ones. On October 6th of 1898, Jenny Chen Morton. So Jenny Chen Morton becomes a curator, really active in really energizing the Historical Society from here in Frankfort. But she goes on to lament about this group's suspension and express, "I hope that the Kentucky Historical Society will be crowned with successes in all of its labors to remove this long-standing cause of mortification." So again, the society stops coming after the Civil War and just is really starting to get some momentum. But Jenny Chen Morton goes on in a subsequent annual meeting to complain about the new accounting system that the state has developed, in which she wrote, "The new accounting system of which we wrote last June went into operations in due time. Its restrictions have been found very annoying in the conduct and progress of the society. Receiving warrants for the money of the gift of the state appropriations for the benefit of the society has been a great inconvenience to the Secretary-Treasurer." That was Jenny Chen Morton. Morton also believed that new buildings were the way to go, not old buildings, to be the most suitable place to house collections of historic books and artifacts. So to those who suggested that the old state capitol would be the perfect home for the Kentucky Historical Society, Morton bristled, quote, "For 25 years, the old capitol was the butt of ridicule for the newspapers of the state. If it was unsafe and unsuitable for the legislature, it would certainly be unsuitable for the Kentucky Historical Society." Shortly after Jenny Chen Morton dies, they decide to move us into the old state capitol. So during the 1920s, the society becomes this destination for school field trips. Great quote, "The extension of the good road systems throughout Kentucky and neighboring states has brought an increased number of visitors to see the collection of the society." And it goes on to talk specifically about how schools are traveling from the farthest reaches of the state to come visit us. We really begin to pick up steam in collecting, research, and increased access to our work. Our journal becomes an outlet for our professional research, and we find that a young historian, Thomas D. Clark, in 1933, writes into the journal. And even as of yesterday, we got some letters of Dr. Clark and Belle Breezing, if you know the history of Belle Breezing, which I find very interesting and eager to get into understanding what some of that is all about. In August of 1948, the Society forms the Kentucky Historical Highway Marker Committee. KHS expands in the old Capitol Annex in 1974, the same year that the Kentucky Military History Museum opens up at the State Arsenal. In this next decade, General Buster, the director of the Historical Society, is starting to create professional staff, hiring archivists, curators, people that know about conservation and display of artifacts. And so by the 1980s, the Society had been adding collections and responsibilities for quite some time, almost to a point that we're busting at the seams. Governor Brereton Jones told a crowd on May 23rd in a rally down at the old state capitol grounds that, we're arguing that we need a new home for history, and it will provide young people, in fact, all Kentuckians, with a state-of-the-art, hands-on museum experience. So even though the people involved have changed and the programs continue to evolve, I think you can see where our commitment to collect and preserve, as outlined in that first meeting in 1836, remains very strong. The first librarian, Edward Jarvis, envisioned more than 160 years ago that the Kentucky Historical Society will strive to be the instrument through which, quote, the whole story of Kentucky, all of her history, public and domestic, will be told. So that brings me to a couple highlights of this past year. It was right after this meeting that the Kentucky Historical Society receives notice that we've been reaccredited from the American Alliance of Museums. We are one of 5 museums in Kentucky to receive such honor. For those of you that's not in the museum field, that's a standard of excellence that we demonstrated to reviewers and to our colleagues across the country. The Kentucky Military History Museum unfortunately closed on December 9th, and it was planned in our notes to reopen today, but it's actually going to open on Tuesday as part of our Veterans Day activities. We also embarked on a new strategic plan with our major 4 goals of empowering our people, deepening connections with our patrons, growing an active community of dedicated supporters, and elevating Kentucky history statewide. We also were part of June being officially recognized as Kentucky History Month when the General Assembly met at the old state capitol and passed House Bill 313, creating Kentucky History Month. And as we were preparing for this, we almost forgot, April 6th, we experienced historic flooding here in Frankfort, which necessitated us moving about 65% of our collections here on the first floor up into higher ground so that we can help preserve them. It was a really big day for us. And then shortly after the staff, there's no danger. We're within like an inch and a half of having floodwaters coming into the area here in downtown. We pivot and are able to host about 40 students from Frankfort Independent School Districts on April 10th and 11th. These were students that were impacted by the flood. They weren't able to be at home, but yet they were still trying to do NTI work. And so this space that you're sitting in today was full of students and counselors and folks to help these students try to get back to a normal part of life after the flooding. We also hosted a prom. And then the Governor's Derby Gala on May 2nd. So hats off, give a big round to the team that pulled that off. And again, I've got so many different things, it's hard to pick the things. We've had a lot of success working with teachers in the Kentucky Department of Education. Our teams have been involved in the review of the Kentucky Social Studies, academic standards for social studies, and we also hosted the inaugural and created the inaugural Teaching Kentucky History Immersive Institute. We hired a new foundation director. I think, Kathy, is this your second one or first? First? One? So we've had Kathy for a year now. We've had a successful run of our Stories, Our Service, which will be closing soon. There was the closing of the Capitol that has happened, and we did with the First Lady's miniature display is on display here in the Commonwealth Hall, and quite a few things. One thing I also wanted to mention was the number of partnerships that we manage. We worked with the Smithsonian Museum of American History for the National Youth Summit that was hosted here. The Japan American Society of Kentucky hosted a big event down at the Old State Capitol lawn where we had about 5,000 people come in here to downtown Frankfort. We hosted the Ohio Valley History Conference just recently, and we are one of the few public history institutions to ever host the conference. We have partnerships with the Kentucky Educational Television, KET, the Kentucky Arts Council, downtown Frankfort, and on and on and on. So thankfully, I have a great team that has summarized all this in a quick 3.5-minute video that I'd like to show you now. For those of you that do that kind of work, I don't envy. Thanks to Greg Hardison, who's over here running camera and sound for us today. I met with Greg yesterday. He's like, I don't know what to not put in. So there, unfortunately, if we didn't get something in that's from some of our team's program, we apologize. It's just there's so much, and as many of you have said to me even today, it's like, man, you guys are doing a lot. So I think that was a great summary and capturing of all the different things that we do here. So I'm hoping, though, that as you were watching that, you saw some of the themes that I talked about in the history of who we are and why we do what we do come about. One, we have a group of passionate people who believe that there's a value and power to history. Through our strategic plan, we have set out a very ambitious vision for who we want and what we want this historical society to be. I think as we've emerged from the legacies of the pandemic, we see that, quote, remove this long-standing cause of mortification. We've been trying to find our way through several things, doing lots of activities. You saw a lot of digital programming that was up there. That's still part of what we found a good way to connect with audiences, as well as thinking about our on-site programming that we're doing. But we won't be able to do that without the grassroots efforts of people like you, our governing board, our foundation, our members, our volunteers, our staff, the communities across the Commonwealth. So I think that's a big piece for us to remember going forward, that our success always comes when we have the passion of people like you. Collecting. Objects and archives are our superpower. It's our authentic elements and our touch points to the past. I think we must reinvigorate our plan for how we collect and find Kentucky stories. We also have to acknowledge that we've had a narrow perspective in our collecting history. So we need to look at how we broaden that and reach out into our new communities and collect history of all of Kentucky. Maybe not right this moment, but we're running out of space. So we need to be thinking about our future when we need to be able to house and care for all these, not just physical items, but even our digital items that we will have here in our storage spaces. And you see that particularly in terms of like collecting oral histories, just the amount of digital archives and things that we do, and not just of digitizing items, but this born digital material that's starting to come about. How do we make that accessible for future researchers of Kentucky's history? How do we make Kentucky's history available through research? Well, we continue to lead the way in Kentucky history research through our fellowship program, through making our collections accessible. I think we can see emerging trends in Kentucky history scholarship coming through programs like the Civil War Governors of Kentucky, the work that's being done with the Register, the type of fellows that we bring in. It is moving KHS beyond very traditional political and military histories to where we get to explore the lived experiences of the diverse communities across the Commonwealth. We have to stay engaged through Kentucky history. A big part of our goal 2 of our strategic plan is how do we reimagine our museum experiences. We have to remember that as a public history organization, people choose to come interact with us. This isn't a school program. In fact, I would even say that students don't choose to come here. The teachers choose to come here. So we bring them kicking and screaming, hopefully not, to our places. But how do we engage them? How do we make them interested as people did in that first letter? And we see that the power of the authentic, our superpower, these artifacts have ways to speak to people and connect to people. So how do we create these immersive learning spaces in our in our immersive learning spaces to be not didactic content delivery? We currently have about 40,000 square feet, I guess if you consider it all across the campus, and I'm sure my team would argue that number, but it's going to be in that range. But if you consider that most major state museums need at least 100,000 square feet to tell their story. So we need to be thinking about how we might want to expand into being able to have space to make all of Kentucky's history accessible. So what's our call to action? And for those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago, this is kind of my piece again, a repeat. We have a crisis in historical literacy in both the United States and in Kentucky. It's evidenced by our decline in civic knowledge and general lack of historical understanding among adults. We work with educators, again, we've mentioned this through National History Day, through a lot of other programming to provide and teach Kentucky history through all grade bands. But our museum experiences, not just here in Frankfort, are one of the few ways that we can engage with adults beyond that academic environment. Most universities do not require students to take U.S. history or government courses, or Kentucky history for that matter. creating a significant gap in foundational knowledge for the next generation of our leaders. Some historians blame this ongoing crisis in historical literacy for the rise of conspiracy theories and political division. The lack of shared understanding of the past makes it easy for us to perpetuate folklore, myth, and memory, allowing for false narratives to take hold. We need to think about updates of the experience here at the History Center. We are actively leveraging historic collections to engage people and communities throughout the Commonwealth and beyond. We must continue to build on the stewardship of collections and improve the access to those collections and the wealth of information they contain. Remember this, originally planned to last 10 years, our current signature exhibit is 26 years old. It needs to be upgraded to align with the changing educational landscape and the museum visitor expectations. Programs of this magnitude would take a minimum of 4 years to develop, research, design, and implement. So we're behind. We must think about the updates of the experience at the old state capitol and the grounds. As we join the nation in commemorating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, KHS will work across the Commonwealth to support education, tourism, and local history events that utilize the old state capitol as a backdrop for Kentucky's emerging democracy. A primary outcome of this project will be to create a strong, sustainable public history experience that raises awareness and appreciation of the Commonwealth's rich and diverse history, as well as enhance both stewardship and interpretation of this national historic landmark. The project will, and so you saw some of the work that's being done down there as we speak today. There's teams down there working on it. The ultimate goal for this is to create both interior and exterior programming spaces at the Old State Capitol, at the annex, and the grounds that surround it to help increase heritage tourism and define the building's use. The project would also call for repurposing the Old State Capitol Annex into the historic site as a fully functional history education space with an opportunity to focus on historic preservation and relieve some of the stress on the Old State Capitol. With the closing of the Capitol, we also have an opportunity to work with school groups and other visitors to learn about the state's history, an important role Kentucky politics plays in our emerging democracy. Kentucky is one of only a handful of states that has no formal K-12 civics education. Not only do we increase public access to Kentucky's political history, it positions the site as a hub for civics education and teaches the important role of those structures, both old and new, in Kentucky's political history. Additionally, this overall restoration will coincide with the plans to celebrate the bicentennial of the Old State Capitol's construction and first use in 1827 to 1830. And finally, through our success on the American 250 grant program, again, you saw some of the information about the amount of funds that we've been able to grant out to local communities across the Commonwealth. We look to continue to build on that support for local history communities through grants and technical services. So I'm very excited about the future of the Kentucky Historical Society. I hope you are too. And I also want to welcome all of our new members who will be joining us on this journey for our next Historical Society. So thank you.
Well, Scott and I should have compared notes. My report is very similar, and it is just mind-blowing how much work this amazing Scott and his amazing staff accomplishes in a year's time. And so thank you for that, Scott. It has been a true honor for me to serve on the Kentucky Historical Society governing board for the last decade, and as its president for the last 2 years. KHS serves a critical role to the health of the culture of this Commonwealth through the preservation and education of its rich and colorful history, do the myriads of services and responsibilities that you've just heard about and seen through that fabulous video that Greg put together. So thank you for that, too. Although these 10 years have been an eventful and sometimes dramatic journey for this organization, it has been an incredible experience to serve alongside some of the most extraordinary people from across Kentucky that love this work as much as I do. And it has been a particular joy to work with our Executive Director, Scott Alvey, and his amazing staff. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity. In the first years of my board service, we were struggling with the downward slide of our budget due to state cutbacks caused by the pension shortfall, which resulted in a staff reduction of over half of our people. With expert professionalism, we continued to provide all these wonderful services and care and provide access to all our properties as well. And we also began reaching our constituencies in new ways. An enormous undertaking was the project to digitize the archives and collections to provide online access to the public. The Civil War Governors Project was experiencing widespread participation, and we also studied our business model and compared ourselves to our neighboring state historical organizations. When the pandemic hit, we were forced to shut our doors for a prolonged period of time, but our staff was creative and resourceful under Scott Alvey's leadership, and we found ways to not only survive, but to thrive. With our small staff, we developed methods for delivering educational content online and on the airwaves with programming like Kentucky Ancestors. We developed a clear process for the historical marker program, surveying the existing inventory and creating an online portal for the public to access. And the Kentucky legislature provided KHS funding to ensure the vibrancy and efficacy of this ongoing program. As tough as those years were during the pandemic, the Commonwealth began to grow economically, and we were also able to increase our budget. So we now have more than doubled the staff size we were just 5 years ago, and that has been a major, major feat, and we just have a terrific staff now, which allows us to expand our ability to deliver on our purpose. KHS is at the center of our nation's 250th celebration here in Kentucky, as Scott spoke about. And we have also engaged our boards in new ways. And it was one of my goals when I became president for us to develop a powerful strategic plan to be a blueprint for fulfilling KHS's critical role for our Commonwealth. There are 4 key strategies, which Scott spoke about. And I'm going to just touch on them one more time because they bear repeating for all of you who are here in this room that we hope will help carry these forward. Number 1, we are empowering our people by fostering a thriving workplace grounded in collaboration, open communication, and trust, to support our incredible staff in the delivery of high-quality services with meaningful impact, purpose, and joy. That's my favorite part of it. Number 2, we are developing a master plan to re-envision the future and reinvigorate our Frankfort campus visitor experience, as Scott was discussing, to inspire our constituency with passion and curiosity for Kentucky's colorful history. The old state capitol and its annex, which is arguably the state's most important historic structure, is in our care, along with the arsenal, which we are so excited to be opening this coming week. And then this building. Number 3, Well, and we also want to work to make better connections between all of these structures in our care and make a more compelling way for visitors to Frankfurt to find all of these offerings. Number 3, we are developing new strategies for growing an active community of dedicated supporters across the Commonwealth. This includes cultivating our existing relationships and developing new ones, broadening our partnerships and diversifying our funding sources to ensure long-term organizational strength. Number 4, we are elevating Kentucky history statewide by expanding our presence, deepening our relationships with individual communities, and amplifying the rich and diverse history of all Kentuckians. I am so grateful and inspired by all of you that I've had the privilege to work with over the last decade, and those of you who are about to take the oath of service anew. I know that I'm leaving this plan and these goals in the hands of truly passionate people who believe that service to this organization requires a vision in order to contribute in a way that enriches and adds to its success. This has guided my work as president, and I hope that I have helped in some small, meaningful way. I leave my gavel in the hands of an extraordinary person who has dedicated nearly 2 decades of service to this organization, one of the most thoughtful, beautiful, brilliant human beings I have ever known, Sheila Mason. I know she will lead the organization with integrity and vision into the future. Thank you for this great joy and honor. Okay, we are moving on in our agenda. Next is old business. Do we have any old business to discuss? I have none currently on the agenda, and seeing none, we're gonna move on to new business, which is what we're very excited to be here today for, and that's the election of the 2026 KHS Governing Board officers and members. So the first order of this is this election. At the October 17th, 2025 board meeting, the report of the nominating committee was accepted. And we thank them for their service and discharge them from their duties. And unfortunately, the head of that committee, Jennifer Brown, was unable to be here today, but we are very grateful for her leadership of that effort. The nominating committee nominates the following new members to serve a 4-year term expiring in November 2029. Mary Berry, Mason Dyer, Jack Mazarak, and Tina Way Smith. The following are nominated to serve a 1-year term in the following officer roles: Sheila Mason as president, Dr. Allison Steen-Turley as first vice president, Laura Suttles Hutchinson as second vice president, and Curtis Dame as third vice president. Are there any additional nominations? All right, seeing none, there being no objection, nominations are now closed. I'd like to ask Donna Long to come now present the ballot report.
This year's ballot counters were Susan Dunlap from Frankfort, Kentucky, and Maggie Kennedy from Frankfort, Kentucky. Kirsten Kendrick served as moderator. The ballot counters met on Thursday, November 6, 2025, and found the following results. A total of 87 ballots were received. 2 were disallowed as not being properly executed. 70 ballots were cast for the official slate as proposed by the KHS Nominating Committee. 15 members extended their voting proxies to KHS Executive Director Scott Alvey without casting a vote for the official slate. There were 0 ballots with write-in candidates. The ballots will be held in the offices of the Kentucky Historical Society until Thursday, November 5th, 2026, and may be inspected by anyone wishing to do so.
Thank you, Donna. All right. And now I would like to ask the Honorable Judge Philip Shepard and all newly elected officers and board members to come forward to take their oath of office. So please come forward.
Okay, incoming members of the board and officers, if you would each please raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth and be faithful and true to the Commonwealth of Kentucky so long as you continue a citizen thereof, and that you will, to the best of your ability, faithfully execute the offices of board members and officers of the Kentucky Historical Society according to law? And do you further solemnly swear or affirm that since the adoption of the present Constitution, that you, being a citizen of this state, have not fought a duel with deadly weapons within this state nor out of it, nor have you sent or accepted a challenge to fight a duel with deadly weapons, nor acted as a second in carrying such a challenge, nor aided or assisted any person thus offending, so help you God? Please say I do. Okay, congratulations. Madam President, glad to see you back in office.
And now we will hear from our new Kentucky Historical Society Governing Board President, Sheila Mason.
Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning, and I have some short remarks, the point of personal privilege, but I certainly won't prolong you. And please forgive my raspy voice. It's becoming a part of me now. I can't get rid of it. But I want to thank you all for this tremendous honor. And particularly, I want to thank you, Cynthia, for your dedicated service to the Kentucky Historical Society. You're certainly deserving of all the accolades given you today. And I think we have one more, at least one more. But you've served with such dedication and with such passion, and actually have been very inspiring to me. Times when, after all the years serving on the executive committee or the governing board, maybe I was getting a little weary, but you always brought us back to a level of passion, a level of curiosity. And so I want to thank you for being such an inspiration to me. And I think we want to, if you come forward. we want to give you this Distinguished Service Award presented to Cynthia Thorpe in grateful recognition of the commendable devotion to the Kentucky Historical Society and the Commonwealth of Kentucky, exemplified by her steadfast strategic guidance and bold vision for the future of Kentucky history during her 9 years of leadership as a member and officer of the KHS Governing Board. And it's presented today and it's signed by me, which is why we couldn't give it to you earlier, because I just became president, and Scott Alfie. And I want you all to know that I take a great deal of comfort in assuming this role today because it's been under such superb leadership of Cynthia and the other members of the governing board. By my count, I've served on this governing board under the leadership of about 7 or 8 different presidents. And so I'm truly honored to step into this role this afternoon, and I thank the nominating committee for the nomination. I thank the governing board members for supporting the nomination, and I thank you, the general membership of the Kentucky Historical Society. You know, this is actually my 2nd time assuming this position. And I started, I think, I know I started, but I think the year was 2005 when I first became a member of the Kentucky Historical Society Governing Board. And I served as president in 2012 and 2013. So this week, I went through some old files and personal notes that I'd kept all those years. And I must say that after all these years, I'm still in awe of the resilience, the strength, the vitality of the Kentucky Historical Society. As an organization, that's a tribute to all of you, especially the general membership, whose support and engagement have sustained this organization. And before I go any further, I want to recognize a couple of former presidents that I see, and I hope I'm not missing anyone, but I do see 2 former presidents. First, Sharon Heckworth. Sharon, would you stand? Who I think was the outgoing president the year I started, somewhere around those years, and who may have been the first female to serve as president of the Kentucky Historical Society. We're not sure of that, so I am putting that caveat there, but we'll research that and let you know, Sharon, if you were. And then Robert Rich. Robert, yeah. And Robert was the person I took the gavel from in 2012. And I have to tell you, I never remember that night because Robert did not want to give the gavel up. And I had to actually tug it and pull it away from him. But as expected, the Kentucky Historical Society has faced great challenges, both internally, and by internally I mean as a part of state government and the state bureaucracy, and also externally from the thoughts, perceptions, and expectation of the citizenry of the Commonwealth. And time after time, the Kentucky Historical Society has faced these challenges as opportunities. For example, it was around 2012 when KHS was hit with the first round of severe budget cuts and that led to drastic fiscal constraints. And this threw us into a sudden transformative period of internal realignment of staff, but also of program delivery. At the time, the Kentucky Historical Society was in the process of implementing a strategic plan with the overriding theme being access. Access to our archives, access to our collections, access to programs and services. And despite operating with limited resources, or reduced resources, not limited, and reduced staffing, KHS made unprecedented progress in key internal areas of the organization, particularly in getting a handle on our collections. And then the emerging theme from the next round of strategic planning focused on engagement, particularly engagement of students, educators, researchers, government officials, other history-focused organizations around the state, total engagement in meaningful ways that would result in Kentuckians using history as a tool to make Kentucky better. And again, KHS rolled up the proverbial sleeve and initiated programs and collaborations that helped educators prepare students to develop critical thinking, creative, and communication skills that helped individuals, families, and organizations and communities strengthen their sense of identity, and helped leaders in both the public and private sector make informed decisions. Years ago, KHS boldly embraced this role in the arena of public history, seizing it as an opportunity to, one, improve public engagement with history, and two, turn the work of the professional historians and supporting staff of KHS into something that enhances the daily life and inspires of everyone and inspires people to think critically about the world and help create a better society. You know, the old African proverb says, life is lived forward, but understood backward. And a historian, Diana Berry, I read a quote from her, puts the onus on those of us who are engaged in public history, who are engaged in this discipline, to, and I quote, provide the context in which people can understand the very complex issues of the past and the present. You know, I've used the words KHS and we interchangeably as I've boasted about the accomplishment of this organization. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what we all know, that none of this would have happened or would happen had it not been the excellent professional staff of the Kentucky Historical Society, who are among the best of historical societies and museums and organizations in the nation. But to all of you who are members of the Kentucky Historical Society, all of you who fall under the category of Kentucky Historical Society professional academic historians, or Kentucky KHS professional administrators, those of you who fall under the umbrella of KHS as volunteers, governing board members, officers, and I'm going to include our governor, who is the chancellor of the Kentucky Historical Society, and we need to remind governors of their role. We are all collectively in this as public historians. Despite the progress we've made, work remains, and I'll end with a subtle reference to the challenges that history faces today. History has and probably always will face naysayers, persons who question its relevance, its impact, its validity. Today, historians grapple with presenting difficult truths. Many of you may recall the famous dialogue between James Baldwin, the author, and William F. Buckley during their 1965 debate at Cambridge Union. As informed citizens, each of us might find ourselves persuaded by either side of the issue they were debating. which is critical thinking in action. And that's not why I bring this debate up. Because there was one philosophical position attributed to Baldwin in that debate that should resonate with all of us in this public history arena. And he said, and this is paraphrasing, we carry history within us. We are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways. It is literally present in all we do. History can never be erased. And so our role as public historians is to ease societal concerns about history. And one final lesson from the Sankofa: everything goes away except the past. Thank you all. I think the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Am I correct? All right, well, don't everyone jump to make the motion to adjourn, but can I have a motion to adjourn? Well, someone jump, but Brent and Curtis would be the second. Any questions on that motion? If not, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Thank you all. What did I do with my water?
Our lunch will be here, and I think it's ready, so we'll take a few minutes to grab lunch, and then we'll start with the rest of the program after a few minutes. Why don't we do this? We didn't really have a plan for this. Can we start with we'll do the first three tables? Why don't we do 3 tables at a time to head on back and get our lunches? You don't have to be quiet, not yet at least. Continue to please go ahead and eat, but we wanted to continue with our program. Continue on that theme of, what's the state of Kentucky history. When the team and I were talking about additional things that we could talk about here, we started, and it's a common theme for us and for those of you that are working in history, and both Sheila and Cynthia talked about this too, is conversations about what's going on nationally about the state of history. How is history being perceived? How is history being used? And John Dichtel from the American Association for State and Local History immediately came to mind to several members of our team. The work that AASLH has done in developing the field, several of us have gone through leadership programs that AASLH provides. I apologize, I've been with the organization for a long time, 17 years, I think. So sometimes I fall into my shorthand. They work on developing the staff, but they also, and I know we have some folks from other local historical organizations, operate the STEPS program, which comes in and helps set some standards and some guidance on how you can help operate your museums. They just recently, and the Kentucky Historical Society is a part of that, is a survey of history practitioners, trying to get a pulse on what's going on in our field, or the people who do this kind of work. They've been spearheading, AASLH has helped spearhead under John's leadership a lot that's been going on for the America 250, the semi-quincentennial celebration. In fact, if I recall this, it was our first meeting like 2017, 2016, when we started talking about getting prepared for almost 10 years ago, preparing for this upcoming celebration. So I was really thrilled that John was able to come and join us today. John, I'm going to give a little quick bio. John Dichtel has been the AASLH president and CEO since 2015. Prior to that, he was the executive director of the National Council on Public History in CPH for 9 years, and worked for the Organization of American Historians for 14 years as deputy director, and in several other roles. John received his MA and PhD in early American history from Indiana University, and from 2006 to 2015 was adjunct faculty member of the history department at Indiana University, Indianapolis. Before graduate school, he worked in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. He is a 2004 graduate of the Seminar for Historical Administration, now called History Leadership Institute, a program of AASLH. John helped to found the History Relevance Campaign and the International Federation for Public History. He is the author of Frontiers of Faith, Bringing Catholicism to the West in the Early Republic. It was published by the University Press of Kentucky in 2008. And for those of you, I'm a Catholic transplant into Central Kentucky, and so big fan of John's book. Please welcome our friend, John Dichtel.
All right. Good afternoon. Please keep eating. I think I feel compelled to confess that I might have wanted to fight a duel at one point in my life, but I haven't. I never did that. So just a couple words about, so I have kind of a meandering talk for you today that covers a lot of things that I think a lot of themes that you've heard already today in some of the remarks, and that I hope will give you a sense of kind of the bigger landscape of what's going on with history museums and historical societies, and a little bit about the 250th. But just a little bit more about ASLH. So it's a national professional association. It's headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, but it is for the entire country. We have members in every state, people working at all different kinds and sizes of historical organizations. It was created almost 120 years ago, and then became a nonprofit about 85 years ago, and has been in Nashville for 60 years. And what we do is we link together history organizations and history people working in those organizations, whether they're volunteers or professional staff, and we help them talk to each other all across the country and learn from each other, and we provide professional development and some leadership on some national initiatives on things like the 250th. And as Scott mentioned, I took the job 10 years ago working for AASLH, and before that I was living and working in Indianapolis and had gotten my degree in Indiana. So I have passed through Kentucky many, many times between Indiana and Tennessee, and then my dissertation, which became my book that Scott mentioned, was on Kentucky history and all along the Ohio River Valley. So I have some roots, some connections to Kentucky. My first article was published in the Kentucky Register. And then years later, when I took this job, our first conference was in Louisville. So that's where I met Cynthia for the first time. I don't know if Scott and I met for the first time there. I don't remember. But Scott was helped with the program committee for that conference. So lots of connections back here. I've worked with Scott and with Kent Whitworth, his predecessor, on many, many projects over the years. Scott is on the board of ASLH right now. Kent Whitworth was on the board about 20 years ago. The two of them are both very active in an organization that we call the State Historical Administrators Meeting that AASLH facilitates, and that's a meeting, a national meeting of the state directors of historical societies and state museums. We get together each November, so we're going to be doing that in Lansing, Michigan in a couple weeks. We'll see Kent Whitworth there. But another thing that Kent was really involved with, and Scott was too, I think, when he was working with Kent, was the History Relevance Campaign. And the History Relevance Campaign was a small coalition of history leaders in the country who wanted to kind of crack the code on how do you talk about history and get people excited about it, but also really communicate the power and importance of getting history right and doing it right, and kind of seeing all the attention and money 10, 15 years ago, go towards the sciences, going towards STEM, and how do you really build a case for history? And so that history relevance, so the thing we talked about was helping the general public see that history is not just in the past, but it's relevant today in the present. And we use it in lots of different ways. So I want to talk a little bit about that and some other things. The History Relevance Project that Kent was one of the founders of, that later evolved once I moved to ASLH. We got a big grant from the Mellon Foundation, and we used that to create something that became called the Reframing History Project. So I want to talk first about the Reframing History Project, then give you a sense of history institutions across the country, some research that we've done, go briefly through some of the issues that they're facing, and then I'll finish on I almost called it the bicentennial, on the semi-quincentennial, the 250th. Reframing History, this project that really does connect to KHS because of Kent Whitworth and Scott's involvement too with the History Relevance Campaign that evolved into Reframing History Project, was an effort to really frame the conversation around, how do you frame conversations around history and talking about the past and showing its value to society? So including relevance, but other things. And we wanted to do this in a scientific research kind of way. We worked with a firm out of Washington, D.C. that specializes in helping nonprofits communicate their messages. This team in Washington, D.C. is called the Frameworks Institute, and what they really do is they help professionals who talk about a subject, whether it's dentists or lawyers or historians, museum curators, people who think about an issue, a topic, a question, a field. How do they talk about it? How does the general public talk about it and understand it? And there is a gap in between those two things. So professionals say A, the public hears B. And the Frameworks Institute really kind of figured out how you drill down into this. Sometimes, I guess an example is that history people in this room, whether you're a trained professional or you've spent a lot of time around history, when someone starts using the word history, your mind goes in lots of interesting directions. For members of the general public, you use the word history, and as often as not, it might be, oh, I had a boring history teacher in high school who read to us out of the textbook. So every time Scott says Kentucky Historical Society or history, they keep thinking textbook reading. And so the Frameworks Institute and this project with us helped figure out how do you avoid those short circuits or those detours, and how do you get the general public to understand history in the way that we're talking about, and what can we learn from the general public and how they think about the history. So they mapped the gaps between these two fields. We did surveying, 5,000 people across the country. They did one-on-one interviews by Zoom because this was happening during COVID. And then they did focus groups. They called it something else, but it was really focus groups where they really dug down into all of this. And I'm just breezing over this, but I wanted you to understand that it's really based in a lot of research and expertise. And then that led to the findings. And what they found is that the general public often gets stuck on this idea of truth. Like, and people will say this, like, oh, we think this is true about, Lincoln's visit in this part of Illinois. We think this is truth. And when you use the word true or truth, that often can sidetrack people or short circuit people into thinking about objective truth that's true for all time, that was true 1,000 years ago, true 200 years ago, true today. And that's a philosophical question. If whether or not things are true over that amount of time is really the realm of philosophy or religion, maybe science. For history, it's more productive to talk about accuracy, or what the evidence shows us. What we know from primary sources, what these artifacts tell us, with our best approaches, best thinking, best research right now, and avoid the word truth and true. Not that historians are always trying to get closer to the truth, but to jump right to truth or true takes people to that philosophical realm where it's going to be, if someone disagrees with you, it might be impossible to win an argument, and it doesn't need to be that kind of argument. So that was one of the findings. Another was that the general public often think about the work that history practitioners, what they do, or what historians do. Historians are really just journalists of the past, that they're recording, and this is being dismissive of what journalists do, but historians are just the facts, ma'am. Just tell me, the facts of the past. I'll write those down, and then that's good. We never have to do it again. We have that. And that's not what historians do. Historians are always revising the historical understanding of the past and adding to it as we learn about new perspectives, new evidence. And then another finding was that anytime an idea of interpretation was raised, like, oh, we're interpreting this to mean that could suggest to the general public that there's some kind of bias involved. And in fact, historians are interpreting all the time. There's evidence and research and the record, but you interpret that to find meaning in it. And the meaning in a primary source, say what the legislature wrote down 100 years ago, or what someone wrote in their diary 200 years ago, the meaning of that is going to change over time. Not dramatically, but it will change. It will mean something different to us when we read what an early pioneer wrote than what it meant to our parents to have read what that person wrote. To have a more productive conversations about history, what we learned in this Reframing History project is that we have to shift our conversations away from abstract truth and instead emphasize the idea of critical engagement and learning from the past, trying to be more ever more accurate and better at what we do. So emphasizing the act of critical thinking, and that it's not just historians and history practitioners that do this, but that we're trying to get our audiences, the public that comes to this building and views exhibits, we want them to exercise critical thinking as well. And this is something that teachers have known for a long time. Educators do this and try and get their students to be critical thinkers. Another result of this Reframing History project was they looked at, I'm just making sure my slides line up here, that they were looking for metaphors that would help us talk about our work as historians, and they tested a bunch of different metaphors. Historians are like geographers who draw maps, or historians take evidence and process it like raw materials and make clay pots or something. And they had or weaving a fabric. And the metaphor that worked best, that tested best with their audiences and helped them truly understand the work of history practitioners and what history institutions are trying to do, was the work of a detective, that you're always looking for new evidence and you're getting closer to the truth. And that a wide variety of evidence can be useful. It's not just the written record, but it's oral histories, it's artifacts, it's archaeological digs, lots of different kinds of evidence. So that was really exciting to see. Again, a lot of museums and a lot of teachers for decades have been using this idea of detective work, but it was really helpful to see that, no, this is the one that really tested the best. And I'm skimming over a very deep report here. It's free, it's online on our website, and it explains that there are these lots of side benefits to using these findings, that when you talk to people about history as detective work, it also helps them value what institutions like the Kentucky Historical Society actually does, and it helps them see the value of the professional staff. And then the third recommendation is, and this is a natural for state historical institutions and for local history institutions, is that you should always, when you can, use location-specific, concrete examples. So, an example of that, I guess, would be to use a primary source rather than a secondary source. Rather than telling someone about, show them in the words of someone from Kentucky or someone locally actually saying the thing. And that always obviously resonates more. Museum people know that, public history people know that. But it also can be useful if you are making some kind of argument or asserting a position with the history that you're doing, with the interpretation, that if you use local specific concrete examples, it makes it harder to dismiss or be abstract about. So for example, if you are trying to tell the story of Kentucky in a very inclusive kind of way, and you're trying to include every, say, ethnicity and immigrant group in your city, and in the news people have been dismissive about or alienating certain ethnic or immigrant groups, it's a lot harder to do that. It's easy to talk about that in the news and nationally, in seeing that as kind of a battleground, but when you talk about your own city and community and you point to an example of like, oh, we want to include this immigrant group or this ethnic neighborhood, and here's their history, and here, so-and-so was a store owner in the 1940s, and this was his experience. Like, it's a lot harder to dismiss that if that person, if it's a local example. As a group of people passionate about history, that's why you're here. You're connected to the Kentucky Historical Society. You're connected to museums and historical societies in other communities. I think this Reframing History project can be really useful to you, so it's worth looking up on our website. There's a toolkit there as well for using it. And we all know that history in museums, historical societies, in colleges and universities, and in K-12 classrooms needs our support. So the Historical Society needs our support, but this is a collective effort. I think as you'll see that there's a lot of threads here that connect to each other. The work we do for one historical institution, one area of history practice really helps every other. We know that the work of my association, the American Association for State and Local History, I think that what we want for the entire field is very similar to what you all want for the Kentucky Historical Society and for the people of Kentucky. And that is, we all want to see history grow and thrive. We want more people to be interested in history and to use it as they experience the world in new ways. We also all know that history nurtures personal identity and community identity in some way, so it helps us, helps you all feel your sense as Kentuckians, all of us as Americans. We understand that people discover their place and time through stories of their families, neighborhoods, and nation. So as they think about themselves connected to the past, that helps them helps them develop an identity that is unique and special. We also know that anyone who reads well-written history or sees a museum exhibit and wonders about how it was all put together and argued in that way, or anyone who reads a news columnist or a journalist making a historical point, that person understands that history teaches critical thinking. You start to see the lines of how critical thinking is used in history. And I believe that as supporters of KHS, you must also feel on some level that history is the foundation of strong, vibrant communities. That there's economic advantages to history, tourism, historic sites that draw people in, but also that personal and family identity, but there's also community identity that is made stronger through history. And then, so I think what we all have in common here in Kentucky, standing here, thinking about the work of the Historical Society and the work of all those smaller institutions across the state, and then the work of ASLH and its members all across the country, we're all thinking about that growth in passion and support for history. We're thinking about history and identity, critical thinking, vibrant communities, and engaged citizens as well. So the second part of what I'd like to talk about today is give you a sense of the landscape of historical organizations across the country. And the state institutions and many of the much smaller ones. So a few years ago, AASLH got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we used that, part of it we used to write a field guide for the 250th that had 5 historical themes, and we published something like 35,000 copies spread across the country, which led to many states using those 5 historical themes or some version of them for their own 250th planning, and also many hundreds or even thousands of institutions, historical societies are using those themes. The other half of the NEH grant we used for a census of historical organizations across the country. No one had ever done a census as rigorous as this. We hired a team at George Mason University and dug into thousands and thousands of tax records and association records, and so we published the census. So I think there are 21,588 dots on that map, if you can see the dots. If you're sitting close enough to see dots and not just seeing a red haze. So we found that there are 21,588 history organizations, very conservative number because lots of things were left out for various reasons. And that report is also on our website if you want to go download it. It's really, I think it's fascinating. One of the things we found, besides a sheer number, and we counted by state and different types of organizations and size of organizations, and I'll get into a little bit of that. But real obvious point was that history organizations are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're in more communities, more small communities, more rural communities than libraries, than most arts organizations. So oftentimes, even if a town doesn't have much else, it will have a historical organization, a group of dedicated volunteers, if nothing else, holding that organization together. So they're everywhere. We also found that history organizations overwhelmingly are very small. So more than 60% of private nonprofit history organizations have annual revenues of less than $50,000. More than 80% have revenues of less than $200,000. And $200,000 is not much if you have a collection and a building, and if you have a paid maybe one full-time or one half-time staff member. More than 90% of those history organizations across the country operate on less than $1 million. Here in Kentucky, we counted at least 371 history organizations, and I put a few other states up there for comparison. 9 historical organizations in Frankfurt itself. For sense of comparison, Tennessee, where I live, we have 382. But Tennessee is 60% larger population-wise than Tennessee, so than Kentucky. So Tennessee is 60% larger, but we have about the same number of history organizations. So you guys are doing great. Indiana, with about 50% more population than Kentucky, has 707 history organizations, and then just threw this in there. California, with 8.5 times the population of Kentucky, only has 3.5 times the number of history organizations. So with that kind of sense of the number and size of those history organizations, the third part of what I want to talk about is give you a sense of some of the big issues that history organizations are facing in the field. So you all remember COVID. This is a graph of visitor attendance at history organizations, a study that we did over a few years, and you can see the big plummeting point where visitation just dropped because of COVID. And we're all still recovering. Many aspects of society are still recovering. Last month, the American Alliance of Museums kind of looked at some of these numbers again and visitation, and what they found is that, this is for all museums, they found that the number of people report, number of American adults who say that they visit museums, have visited a museum, is now slightly ahead of what it was before the pandemic. So it was 31% right before the pandemic. It's now 33%, so that's great. But the number of repeat visitors, so adults who say, oh, I've been to a museum more than once in the last year, that's actually not fully recovered yet. It's still slightly down. So attendance numbers in many history organizations are still struggling, but in many others, it's getting close to what it was. Another challenge that the field is facing is workforce issues. So AASLH, my organization, we just, I think Scott mentioned it, we just finished a workforce survey. We got 3,700 responses from across the country of people who work in historical societies and history museums. We're still going through all that data, pulling it out. We're going to be pulling information and using it for years. But these are some of the kind of top line results. So we found that 70% of the people working in the field are female, 26% are men, so 70% women, 26% men. The percentage in between is, I guess, other. About 90% of history practitioners in the country, that chart on the left, the bar graph on the left, are white. If you remove the, so 90% white, non-Hispanic. We learned that millennials, so people who are aged 29 to 44, they make up 33% of the practitioners. So millennials now are the single largest generation in the field. There are about 5 generations working in the field right now. We tend to lean to the older side of demographics, and so this is a big change for us coming, these millennials, followed by Gen Y. The survey also then looked at how people feel about the work they're doing. What do they think about working in a historical society or for a history museum? So ask questions like, is your work meaningful? So 93% said yes, the work is meaningful. That is fantastic. They are excited about the work they do, 89%. Their manager supports them, 81%. They feel like they can grow and learn at their job, 77%. So those are good numbers, but there were troubling numbers as well. We learned that 43% of history practitioners had thought about leaving the field recently, seriously thought about leaving the field to do something else. And some of the reasons they gave, low pay, current political climate, or lack of opportunities for growth. So these are issues that the field will be struggling with. Didn't want to get to that one yet. Another issue that the field is dealing with is a rapidly aging volunteer pool, and you probably have noticed this at your own institutions, in your own communities. The greatest generation and boomers have been fantastic volunteers. COVID kind of shifted that. People are less, even though they might have been willing to volunteer before, less willing to volunteer after. Plus, they're also aging and just doing other things or passing along. And it's not clear that there's another generation that's going to step up and volunteer in those same numbers. And so those 60% of institutions that operate with $50,000 or less, what is going to happen to them and their collections of records and artifacts if there are no volunteers or not enough volunteers? So that's something that is not just happening in the history field, but also in all kinds of nonprofit fields. So I wanted to throw this in here, a great picture of Lincoln using his iPhone. Another challenge is going to be AI, AI, everyone's talking about it. It's coming for history. So some of the, unique challenges for the history field is that, one, AI, large language learning models are built on data, and they like to scrape data. Those companies love to get it when it's free. A lot of content from historical societies is free on the internet. So do you want your content being scraped and used? Well, if we don't do that, then these AI models can be built on bad data, bad information. So isn't it better that all the articles from the Kentucky Register be used rather than not used? So figuring out things like that, and then also just a sense of competition from AI. Like if someone can sit in their own home and watch fantastic videos about exciting history in Kentucky, all dramatized for them, with action plots, might they be less likely to come visit the museum? Who knows? Or maybe it makes them more likely to come visit the museum. So another challenge we're trying to figure out, like everyone else, how does AI affect our field? And then a fifth challenge facing the field is a disappearance of federal funding. So these organizations here, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, the National Park Service, and the National Endowment for Humanities, among others, have given grants to many history organizations and museums across the country for decades. They have professional staff that have a lot of institutional memory, institutional knowledge, professional leadership that would normally help us think through things like the challenge of AI or the disappearance of volunteer pools. But these federal agencies have been decimated. Their funding has been cut, staff has been fired, and I don't just mean the shutdown, I mean before that. So that landscape has dramatically changed. National Endowment for the Humanities also has funded state humanities councils. So in every state has a state humanities council. Those councils give out grants that they get money from the federal government, from the NEH. They give that back out to small local history organizations and other humanities organizations to do all kinds of programming. That has been just destroyed, nearly destroyed. And the irony there is that the State Humanity Council system was created during the bicentennial. In 1976, the State Humanities Councils were launched as a network. So here we are at a moment when we should be expecting more support for the work that KHS and other history organizations are doing, and that very long-held 50 years of terrific support is gone. And so that's a challenge that all these history organizations are trying to figure out. And then that leads me to maybe the final challenge here is how to run a history organization, how to operate it in serving all parts of America, all people. How do you do that with such a polarized partisan divide going on? And I think we're all getting used to that in our daily life, kind of navigating that with neighbors and friends and family. Well, how do you do that in a history institution? So one way is thinking about that reframing history project I mentioned. There are some answers in there. I guess there's more challenges here than answers. But how, when the lanes are being narrowed all the time on what can be said and can't be said from both sides, all sides, books and topics being banned in certain places, certain states, certain school districts, the Smithsonian and the National Park Service being told what they can and can't say, what the historians who they hire to do projects with them, what they're allowed to say and can't say, and information being removed from signs, that sets an example and causes a chilling effect. And so state and local history organizations are right now dealing with that chilling effect. Kind of in the hopeful direction, I'll kind of hopefully end here in a couple minutes in a more hopeful direction. This is a great report. I encourage you to look it up from an organization called More in Common. So More in Common released this Diffusing the History Wars research, and they had surveyed, again, thousands of people, lots of focus groups, and they were studying polarization in the national conversation over how U.S. history is taught to young people, taught in the schools. And Americans, it turns out, are more united than divided in their beliefs about history and about how that history should be shared with young people. So that's really exciting, really hopeful. And this More in Common report found that Americans want to understand both the admirable and the painful parts of the past. They value honesty, complexity, and the opportunity to think critically. And across ideologies, Americans overwhelmingly support teaching both the inspiring and the painful aspects of the nation's past. 83%, so 83% agreed that students should learn the good and the bad of American history. And this report is full of lots of different ways of asking that question. But the really interesting thing they did is they asked the question of people who said they were Democrats and asked independents and people who said they were Republicans. And what they found is that the real problem is that there's a gap in perception, that Democrats assume that Republicans don't want to hear about slavery, don't want to talk about slavery at all. Republicans think that Democrats want students to feel ashamed about America. And in all the wonderful graphs that you'll see in this report, that's just simply not true. It makes great news stories, and pundits love to talk like that, but that is not what the vast majority, 83% of Americans want. What's left out of that 83% are the, whatever that is, what is it, 17? So like 6 and 11 or whatever, I can't do math. Those are people on the extreme sides. So there is hope here if we can get people to listen to each other across these gaps. And that's one of the things that history museums, I think, do really well, is bring people in and get them to think a little bit across that gap to try and understand either people in the past who were different from them or their neighbors today who might be different from them. And so the final thing I spent a couple minutes on here is America 250. So I think this is still a great opportunity for all of us. There is a national commission. That's our logo collectively. I'm not on the commission. So the commission was created by Congress in 2016. President signed it. And it has been planning for, 9 years. It's been through a lot of kind of internal problems, change of the guard 2 or 3 times, not just because of administrations changing, but also just problems that were going on. Similar things happened during the bicentennial. Again, here we are having a major commemoration for the country without real leadership from the commission that was set up. But the good news is that the states have been fantastic. Every state now has a state commission. That's where the real action is going to be, in the state commissions and what happens locally in your towns, in your cities. That kind of, the historical programming, the celebratory programming, maybe some programming that gets into kind of a deep reckoning, painful reckoning with the past. There's room for it all, celebration and digging into some of the more sensitive stuff as well. That's what's going to be happening at the state and local level. Nationally, they still haven't even decided if they're going to create a coin. I heard a $2.50 coin, a dollar coin. I'm old enough to remember the bicentennial, and it seemed like we had a lot more that rolled out in the bicentennial, a year or two before. That just doesn't seem to be coming. There will be some exciting national programs, but the real message here is that it's grassroots and it's at the state and local level. So wherever it happens, but especially at the state and local level, the semi-quincentennial is an opportunity to rally around a vision of a whole, honest approach to the past. That idea of revising and making it better, making it more accurate. And one of the ways we make the past more accurate, I think Scott mentioned this when he talked about the collection history of this institution. You have to actually collect stories and records of people who haven't been represented in order to be inclusive and representative, and you have to actually tell their stories. To tell that great national history, you have to collect a lot of different stories and perspectives. And we can do that. Institutions are doing that. We hope to see more of it with the 250th. And despite its many shortcomings, the bicentennial 50 years ago had a tremendous impact. The State Humanities Councils, as I mentioned, were created as a network. The Office of Museum Services in the federal government was founded, which has been of great use to history organizations. And there was a huge flood of general and public interest in the American story and genealogy and historic preservation. So now we start to ask ourselves, what is going to be the legacy of the semi-quincentennial? What foundations can we lay for the future? You heard Scott and Cynthia and Sheila talk about the strategic plan and what's being planned here in Kentucky, but also thinking nationally, what will happen in other states, what will happen across the country that really puts a legacy forward for the future. I know, well, actually, let me just point out, this is my 5th grade classroom picture. I'm in the back with the really blonde hair and the tricorn hat. So I remember what the bicentennial was like. I know there's still time to make this semi-quincentennial a great thing. Speaking of legacy, a few of your sister institutions were lucky enough in the timing of the cycle of, hey, we need a new building. You guys have a great building. Some of these others didn't, and they're going to be unveiled in this 2026, 2027 moment. So Utah State Historical Society is building a great new state museum right next to their state capitol. Montana is building the Montana Heritage Center, opening next year. The Wisconsin Historical Society will open its new museum in 2027. And I don't have a picture of it because I guess there's not really a picture, but California is the opposite example. In the past year, California Historical Society died. So the biggest state in the country, one of the biggest economies in the world, and their state historical society went out of existence. They transferred the entire collection to Stanford University. There is no museum you can go visit. There's not even a historical society. So when thinking about legacies and what we lay down for the future, there's still work to do. So I want to close by emphasizing that the 250th is a chance for Americans of all backgrounds to engage critically with our nation's past and understand its connections to the present. It's a chance to build great structures like these buildings, feed an appreciation of history, and also to use that learning and shared experience to reknit the fabric of democracy and civic culture in this country and the nation. And I'll end by urging all of us to work together on seeking and developing common ground in our historical organizations, even if it's a past, a historical story that we're telling that we continue to contest and wrestle over. Disagreement and debate are okay as long as we're all playing by the same rules of actually offering evidence. For several years, the Harvard historian Jill Lepore and others have been calling for a new kind of Americanism that I think calls us to this higher level, what she calls a clear-eyed reckoning with American history, its sorrows no less than its glories. In her book, This America, The Case for the Nation, Lepore further defines this America as, quote, a community of belonging and commitment held together by the strength of our ideas and by the force of our disagreements. A nation founded on universal ideals will never stop fighting over the meaning of its past and the direction of its future, unquote. That doesn't mean the past or future is meaningless or directionless or that anyone can afford to sit out the fight. She says, quote, the nation as ever is the fight. So the work we do in history organizations like KHS, the conversations we have in spaces like this and in the exhibits when we're looking at them or at a historic site, those conversations, that work, it's all part of this fight together. And this never-ending discussion of the meaning of the past in the present, how we take many individual stories and make one history out of it as a people, the e pluribus unum of America. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for John before we? No. Well, again, thank you, John, very much for being here today. So that concludes our part of our History Awards program. I think we have our folks, if you're welcome to stay around. We're going to be several people who have shown their support through purchasing of our Bricks and Leaves program here at the foundation. So that program will begin here shortly.